And simply, like Jen was saying, it's getting warmer, and ice melts when it's warm. That's just pretty basic physics that I think we learn when we're kids, So that's why we're out here. We are working on the polar bear, but the bigger message is let's just be better stewards of the earth and conserve sea ice, because sea ice really impacts the world in a lot of different really neat ways. That's kind of getting more into like global maybe climate patterns, but it's a pretty cool environment. And there's a lot of people that depend on the sea ice as well in the north to keep their way of life the same. And so we want to make sure that we all work together to do that. We have a question about snowy owls, which again, is anyone here a snowy owl expert? No. All right. I'm going to answer a couple things, a few things I know about snowy owls. So the question is, and then we can maybe connect someone with we do know a snowy owl expert. It's just not me. So can you tell us more about the snowy owl? Do they live solitary lives, or do owls live in pairs that mate for life? And what do the owls eat? I'm going to tell you the limited amount I know from being out here. So there have been snowy owls out here for the last few years, and we have been seeing male and females at the same time. I'm honestly not sure if they're a pair. We kind of assume they are, but they might not be. And they are hunting mostly the small mammals out here. I would think maybe occasionally they might get a ptarmigan. So we've got these little ptarmigans out here. They're like the tundra chicken. But I think usually they're hunting the smaller mammal type things. So again, the mice and voles and stuff like that. We see them kind of perched on rocks around the tundra. And they're pretty... I don't know. They're beautiful animals. The females are larger than the males. And I think the female we saw this year was more white than the male, who had a little more brown, but also white in general. So if we can find out more about snowy owls, or maybe even at one point, maybe not this year, but in the future, set up an expert chat or something, that would be pretty cool. Okay, so question for BJ. Coming back to BJ. I like this reporting from Buggy One. It's pretty funny. I need a chair on wheels and maybe like a lapel mic so I don't have to drag this microphone around. Okay, BJ, can you describe the role of tundra buggies? Are they for staff, tourists, or both?
Yeah, mostly these things are for tourists. You can kind of see over our shoulder there. Where is it? Right there. There's a tundra buggy, and that's a full tour. Oh yeah. Some of them are pretty quiet. I think it depends on the driver. They have seats for 40, and people come from all over the world to load up on the tundra buggies. They fly all the way here to Churchill. They stay in the hotels, and they come out either for day tours or multiple day tours here on the tundra buggy. For the folks that want to stay overnight, there's a lodge here that we all stay at overnight. It's the Tundra Buggy Lodge. And it's really more like a space station than anything else. Because once we get off the ground in town, which is about an hour and a half drive from here, you don't get on the ground again. You load and unload from the back deck right into the lodge there. You walk up and down it like a train car. There's bunks in there. There's bathrooms in there. There's showers. There's a place to eat. There's even a lounge to kind of kick back and relax and watch the bears outside. So it's a pretty neat place, but there's no getting on the ground. There's a few staff buggies as well. You probably heard them, and you probably see them on the cams every once in a while. Everything on the lodge itself has to be brought out and brought back. So that includes all the food. So there's one that brings food out and back. There's one that brings luggage out and back. There's one that brings water out and back, and that one's just kind of sitting over here. We'll try to get a cam on it later. They pump water, filter, and UV filter it, and then pump it on the lodge for all the needs here. And then, of course, all the human waste gets hauled back to town on a different buggy. Yes, the poop truck. And, so that's the tundra buggies.
Show them our fireplace?
I don't think we can, yeah. You can. At the back of this buggy, so buggy 1 is different than the tourist buggies. The buggy 15 is the one that's behind us there. It has, like I said, seats for 40 in there. This one doesn't have any permanent seats in it. You can see we're just scooting around on folding chairs.
It's a little bit dangerous over those big humps if we haven't warned people enough, because you can definitely topple over in here.
If my foot gets a little heavy, I can really toss everybody in the buggy here right onto the floor. But yeah, so this is an open space, so we can use it as our broadcast studio for stuff like this and for the Tundra Connections program that we do for Polar Bears International. on the back of the buggy. You can't really see it, and unfortunately the camera's mounted, so we can't move it. But there's beds back here, and there's a bathroom back behind us. So this is kind of a special little buggy, just for Polar Bears International. It's Frontiers North Adventures that loans this to us for every season, which is really generous of them.
Yeah. Well, thanks, BJ. Oh, and we did talk about this in the first live chat, but I saw some people were interested in it and asking questions. Could you just really briefly talk about the road system here and why it's in place and how we follow it?
Yeah, totally. So Fort Churchill was a military base back in, I believe, I got to go back to the book, but I think it's like the 50s, maybe the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It closed in the 60s here in Churchill, Manitoba. And the military used to do exercises out here with different vehicles. And so they created the road system. The buggies stay to that same road system to make sure we don't tear up the tundra. If we were to drive off the road, the damage we would do to the muskeg and to the surroundings would last for well beyond any of our lifetimes. So we stay on the trail so we don't muck everything up. And that's who established it, the military.
Thank you. And part of the reason that it takes so long for the plant life around here to rebound is just such a harsh growing condition up here. There's not a lot of sunlight and only a couple months where it's really kind of warm and nice, and the plants aren't getting battered by the Arctic winds and snow, and it's not cloudy. So really not a lot of growing season up here. That's why we see the trees we do see, especially kind of anywhere near the coast, are pretty small. We'll see flag trees sometimes. So those are trees that only have branches on one half of their trunk, which is pretty cool. And you can tell the direction of the wind by looking at the flag trees. So those are kind of neat. But yeah, plants, and there's a crazy diversity of plants up here, considering there's lots of different berries and mosses and willows and bushes, but they're all pretty low to the ground, and only get to grow a little bit every year. So another question about, are polar bears considered a keystone species? They are the apex predator in their environment, and as such we do consider them a keystone species. One interesting thing we've seen in the last couple years in Hudson Bay is that with the ice breaking up differently, we have seen some orca whales come into the bay. Now, so far, this isn't, an indication of anything huge happening or any regime shifts, but if that continues to happen, it's possible there may be some competition at the top of the food chain there for polar bears and access to seals, but it really depends. There's a lot of factors there. So we're just kind of keeping our eye on it as something kind of interesting ecologically in the bay. And right now, there's not a whole lot else we can say about that. Is smell the strongest sense that polar bears rely on, and how do they compensate with the strong winds? Are they less active the stronger the winds? So polar bears have an excellent sense of smell. We believe they can smell a seal from maybe about 1 kilometer away on the sea ice. They can even smell seals under their snow layers. It really does depend on the winds, though. If the wind isn't in their favor, it's going to be hard for polar bears to smell out there. And I don't know, probably some polar bears smell better than other ones, too. So it kind of depends how on it they are. But yes, they have a very, very good sense of smell. Many bears do. And I don't know how they compensate with the strong winds. So there has been a bit of research looking at the stronger the winds, the more the ice breaks up, and the kind of different patterns that polar bears have to walk. But I'm not sure if I don't think it took into consideration their sense of smell, how that shifts with the wind. But maybe we'll know that one day. I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. And then, are they less active the stronger the winds? We do see them hunker down here when the winds are going really fast. But of course, there's not really many seals to get right now. So they're probably way more willing to just kind of lay down with their back to the wind and go to sleep. Out on the sea ice, as far as I know, from what I've heard, when it gets super, super stormy and there's no real point for hunting, they definitely will lay down. But I would assume maybe if there's chances of getting seals, or they might not want to take a break. But that's something I can't really answer on behalf of polar bears. Might depend on the bear.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Because seals don't have to stop breathing.
Right.
Just because it's blowing, they still have to go to their breathing holes, and they still have to surface. So.
I have heard that when it's really stormy, seals will kind of go to sleep in the water, and they can float, so they can keep breathing with their heads above the water, but they kind of bob in the water, and that might be a good opportunity for a polar bear to go get a seal. So I've definitely heard that, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know. There's so many mysteries out there on the sea ice that I'm not going to answer or pretend to answer, but it's pretty interesting. Ooh, and this is a cool question too. So how do sows emancipate their cubs after their 2.5 years together? Do they just chase them off? If there are twins, will the twins stay together for a certain amount of time, or does everyone go off on their own? So again, this isn't something we really have hard knowledge on, but we do believe, and from what we've kind of seen, is that sows, yeah, it may be kind of a chase-off sort of deal, or when the female goes into heat, a big male comes along, helps chase the cubs away. The mother just won't give them milk anymore, or that kind of affection. So I'm sure it's not a great kind of period in a polar bear's life when their mom kind of kicks them out, but most animals have to go through that. And we actually do think that if they're siblings, they might stay together for a little while. We have seen that. As for how long, I think it might completely depend, maybe even on gender, on their bond, on what happens to them circumstantially when they get booted away from mom. But we think that often happens. They'll stick together for a little while, and then I don't know. Couldn't tell you. Maybe one day we'll have more information on that. So let's just answer a couple more questions. I know we started a bit late, but we don't want to drag it on too much past 3 o'clock. How old is the oldest polar bear you are watching or studying? How long do they typically live for? So let me think about that. Well, we know that the oldest polar bear, do you want to talk a little bit about her? You know a lot about that.
Sure. The oldest polar bear, she was in captivity, or the oldest polar bear that we know about was in captivity here, or just south of here at the Winnipeg Zoo. And she lived to be 42 years old. Her name was Debbie. And the joke that I was told is that she had a really good health care plan down there. You know, she had a whole team of vets that whenever she had anything go wrong, they would take care of her. Of course, wild bears don't have that advantage. If something happens to them, they have to either figure it out themselves or they may not make it. So that's one big limiter there in the wild polar bear's life. But yeah.
Yeah. So wild polar bears definitely don't live as long as Debbie did. We know that females can live into their mid to late 20s, maybe a few have gone a little bit past that. And male polar bears usually about mid-20s, early 20s. They have a bit of a tougher go just with all the kind of fighting for females and stuff. So sometimes they can get pretty beat up by the time they're in their 20s. Yeah, so I don't know how old the oldest one is that we're watching. I think we know of a female that's caller right now that's about, I think, 22. I might have to check on that, but we've definitely been following bears that are in their early 20s. Yeah. So this is, I'll have to look this up on our website. So someone is asking about polar bear vocalization and any indication as to how they communicate with one another. So I believe we do have a recording, or there is a recording somewhere of polar bear vocalizations. I believe it was captured in a zoo. They do vocalize to each other, mostly I think moms to cubs. They will kind of talk a little bit, and then I'm not sure if males, I think they could growl at each other. I'm not even going to go there. I don't really know. I'm going to look that up. There's a little bit of research.
I was working with Megan Owen, Dr. Megan Owen of San Diego, because people were looking at, or she was looking at polar bear vocalizations, and so I took some recording equipment down. I did at Nanook Lodge south of here on Cape Tatnam, pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and it was there was a female with cubs on a food source, and then another female and cubs came in, and that's when they started vocalizing. So it seemed to be like a high stress. Females to each other. That's what it looked like. It looked like a high stress situation. It was pretty neat to capture, for sure. Yeah, but you almost never hear them vocalize around here. No. Kind of stress maybe, or yeah. Yeah, there's just not a whole. I mean, there's nothing really going on, is there? They're just waiting for the sea ice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to tell each other they're sleeping today. But they do also communicate by scent, and Megan Owen also was involved in that study that showed that males will follow female polar bear prints across the sea ice because they can actually smell that the female is in heat through her smelly footprints. And so that is a type of communication that polar bears also do, which is pretty neat.
I was listening to one snort at another one.
What's that?
I said I was listening to one snort at another one earlier today.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Then that was maybe two males. Well, I guess it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was surprised because I have a 3-year-old at home, and you ask questions, what song does the dog make, or what song does the cat make? Okay, what sound does the bear make? And it's the growl. But I haven't heard a growl after all the bears we've seen, so it's true. I guess it must be really if there's something to fight for. But they just seem like really. I was asking this as well. Maybe this is a question for me to you, but do you think they get lonely, bears? I mean, they seem kind of solitary, like kind of on their own, especially the male bears.
I mean, I think in general they're live solitary lives, but I feel like some of them, we have seen them before kind of almost form pairs, and whether that's because they're related, we don't know, but kind of last year we had those two that were kind of buddies, and they were hanging around each other all season and causing trouble around here. So I think maybe some do like company more than others, and we do see the large groups of polar bears that seem to be totally fine hanging out with each other. Jack, do you know of any vocalizations in Kaktovik at all when all those bears are eating at the same pile?
No, I don't remember. I don't think I was paying attention, but I was this morning, and it wasn't through the nostrils. It was more, if anybody is into linguistics, more of a fricative, meaning passing air between the tongue and the cheeks. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Oh, what are you pointing at, Jen?
There's a bear.
Is that a different one?
You heard what your show was on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're having a little cameo. Oh, BJ's getting him up. He's coming right towards us. Well, let's see if we can't get... This is a nice way to end our live chat for sure.
Look up from your computer, and there he is.
We
Whoa.
have to be careful now. We don't wreck another camera.
Oh, yeah. Getting right to it. Well,
BJ's moving the camera up, so the bear... Uh-oh. Oh, no. And that's exactly... Good timing, BJ.
Did we get the zoom on the cam there?
I don't know. I think they did.
Yeah, hopefully you
Oh.
get to see some of that.
That's hilarious.
Cute little bear, huh?
Yeah, he's got ear tags, so that's a bear that has been handled before.
That's our buddy who's been around a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else can you say about this?
Well, I think he is a young-ish bear, and I say he, but I can't be 100% sure if it's a he or she. But it's definitely not one of the biggest ones out here. But looking pretty good. It's got a good amount of body fat for its size. Going underneath the buggy right now. It's gonna go peek out the other side.
we always have to do these checks when we go
Oh yeah.
driving.
Oh, okay. Oh, there he is. Cute. Yeah, so I guess this will be a pretty good time to wrap it up. So all our guests are staring out the window watching this bear, and we'll let you guys get back to bear watching or watching the other awesome Explore cams. I just want to thank you for joining us and for asking those great questions. We really like chatting with you guys and just kind of sharing a bit of our experience out here, and just thanks for hanging out with us on Buggy One today while we're finished with our educational stuff. And it's just great to have a really nice chat with our viewers. And we will have another live chat Friday morning, I think is our next one. But we'll have the cams running between then all through the weekend, and we're going to be keeping in touch. November 1st is the beginning of Polar Bear Week, which is exciting. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have lots of broadcasts, and we'll have some challenges through PBI and some fun stuff that you guys can do to get involved with polar bears. And then the week after that is our STEM week, where we will have some scientists up here that are really involved in using technology to study polar bears. So should be really, really great. Thanks for joining us. We're going to keep you updated on what's going on out here on the tundra with the polar bears, and we hope to see you soon. And thanks to all the panelists that I pulled into the live chat today. They were great. So bye. Hi, everybody. My name is Elisa McCall, and I'm with Polar Bears International. And we are broadcasting to you today live from Buggy One in Churchill, Manitoba. So this is BJ Kirschhofer. BJ, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm BJ Kirschhofer, and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International, and also part-time captain of Buggy One. Monday through Friday, I sit in this seat over here and drive the polar bear cam around, and on the weekends, KT Miller is the captain of Buggy One. Yeah.
Cool. Well, some of you, I think, joined us last year, so it's fantastic to have you back again. And some of you are probably new to this Tundra buggy cam, so maybe we can explain a little bit about what's going on here. First of all, we would love to thank explore.org for helping us do this. Explore.org, of course, provides just a ton of help getting these cameras up and running. They're a huge partner of ours. We couldn't do a lot of what we do without them. Also, Frontiers North Adventures. They are the owners of the Tundra Buggy and Tundra Buggy Lodge, and they donate Buggy One to us all through bear season so that we can do these educational outreach programs and talk to people all around the world from polar bear country. So that's pretty darn cool. And we'd also like to thank Parks Canada, who's been really instrumental in helping us set up our Cape cams, which we will also talk about, and maybe you will see. So with that, why are we here right now? Well, it's polar bear season because it's the polar bear migration coming through Churchill right now. We are on the coast of Hudson Bay at the moment, and Hudson Bay is a large body of water that's relatively shallow, and it completely freezes over in the winter and completely melts in the summer. And when it freezes over, there's sea ice, and polar bears love sea ice, and polar bears live all around the coast of Hudson Bay. And when there's sea ice, we can't see them. They're out there and they're hunting seals. They use sea ice mainly for hunting seals, also for traveling, mating, and some aspects of reproduction. Some polar bears den on the sea ice. But in Hudson Bay, they den on land because in the summer, the ice completely melts and we see polar bears come onto shore and just wait for the next round of seal hunting. And right now, they've been waiting since about July. And it's almost time for the bay to freeze up. We don't know when it will be, but it should be within the next 2 to 6 weeks. And the bears know this. Whether they know it because the light's changing or the temperature's changing, we're not too sure. And so they're lining up along the coast. So I got a message that they're only intermittently hearing us. Can we do anything about the audio? Okay, we're going to check the audio and maybe we'll do another quick intro. Thanks for bearing with us during our first live chat of the season, everybody. Okay, we're just going to keep talking. So let's talk a little bit about, well, how about we talk about the summer? So for anyone that was watching the cams in the summer, you maybe saw the Beluga cam, which is also live from Churchill, Manitoba. And that was with the very incredible Haley Shepard as the boat captain. And Haley's on one of her other jobs right now as a polar bear tour guide. And so she's out somewhere here right now, bringing groups of tourists around and talking about polar bears. And that she just has huge shoes to fill. She's an incredible guide. And so we'll do our best to kind of tell you guys about polar bears throughout the season and keep in touch. And then maybe if we can get Haley on here sometime this year, we'd love to do that. She's wonderful. And we've already seen her this year, and she's having a great time watching polar bears. So we do have one polar bear outside our buggy right now. This guy, likely a male, but hard to tell from such a distance. He's just been sleeping. He's pretty unperturbed by all of this. We have one other buggy watching him, and he's barely moved. So a lot of the bears that are around here right now, they are kind of they're in a fasting state. So we used to say that there was, or think that there was a state of walking hibernation. So polar bears don't hibernate like other bears, but we figured, well, maybe during the summer they lower their metabolic rate and kind of go into some sort of hibernation state. But we found out from some research that came out this year that they don't actually do that. So they're simply fasting. It's been quite a while since they've eaten a really solid meal. You may see some polar bears on the cam eating kelp. In the summer, some polar bears like to eat goose eggs, kind of anything they can find. Bears just love food. Bears like being fat. But these polar bears, they really need the fat from the seals. That's where they're getting their calories. They have huge bodies. Their digestive systems are really evolved to eat fat and not the amounts of carbohydrates and proteins that brown bears or even black bears would eat. So these bears are really looking for their first seal of the season, hopefully in the next month or two. So we're going to keep talking about stuff, but we'll sprinkle in some questions while we're doing this. Let's just start off with one for BJ. So we are in the middle of the Tundra right now, and we're on this little vehicle, and we're quite a ways from town. So we are remote broadcasting. How the heck are we doing this, BJ? And what are some challenges with making this happen?
We definitely have a lot of help from Explore.org and some of their contractors to help bring the internet out here. But basically, we're using more or less amped up wireless Wi-Fi technology. It's directed in a single direction instead of in all directions like your hotspot at home. And that is able, with big antennas and tall towers, to be able to be blasted across the tundra to a moving vehicle like we have here. So it's a unique application for this type of technology. I think a lot of it's designed for sort of point-to-point communications, but to put it on a vehicle like this in an area like this is unique, like I say. So there's definitely a lot of challenges that come along with that. Because we are in the subarctic here outside Churchill, the weather is just nasty, especially this time of year. It's blowing, it's cold. There's a lot of stuff that makes it so these electronics don't really want to work, and it's uncomfortable for people to work too. So there's been a lot of challenges that we face. I mean, everything from ice building up on our antennas to having to go visit these sites to check on stuff when it's like 40 degrees below zero or colder. So there's a challenge there that I find pretty fun.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you find it fun. It's not the thing I'm good at doing, but everyone just loves BJ out here because he's providing internet for just huge groups of people. We also, one place we work with out here is the Churchill Northern Study Center, and that's a big research center that's about half an hour outside town, not too far from where we are right now. And throughout the year, they host scientists to do research. They are hosting some learning vacations right now during bear season, and it's just the most incredible northern research facility. We kind of joke that when we're doing field work from Churchill, doing polar bear work or anything, it's really luxurious compared to doing research in other parts of the Arctic, because we're coming back to a great meal and warm rooms and really high-tech equipment and different sorts of stuff at the end of the day, which is pretty neat. And it's with their help that we can get some of this internet blasting out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good partnership. Like I said, internet out here requires tall towers, and the Churchill Northern Study Center was once a rocket research range, and so they would shoot rockets into the atmosphere to study the northern lights. Now they have built a LEED Gold certified building, and they can house researchers like Elisa and some of the other polar bear researchers, or people looking at permafrost or birds or just about anything out here, and help support their operations. So it's a really fascinating facility. Now, we use their tower, and in turn, we give them internet. Some of the things that they use it for is not only their guests and their staff to be able to communicate back home, but also they have some long-term contract researchers there, people looking at the northern lights, folks looking at lightning in the Arctic here, folks looking at CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. So there's a lot of neat stuff going on out there. And of course, all that stuff requires computers. So they're able to pipe into these computers through the internet, through the bandwidth that we help provide. And they can log this data over a long period of time and then grab it via the internet. They don't have to make a big trip up here to get that stuff. So yeah, it's a great partnership. We love working with the CNSC.
And maybe you can talk a bit about the Aurora Cam while you're...
Yeah, so we're really pretty pumped about this one, and I think Explore is going to be really excited as well as the Explore community. At the very top of this 180-foot tower, we helped install a camera that's real sensitive after dark, and it'll be able to point up into the night sky and stream the northern lights. Now, this time of year, the northern lights are a little bit hit and miss. It's often cloudy until the bay freezes up. But once the ice forms out there on the bay, it's going to be a fantastic camera. I don't know if some of you maybe saw the stuff captured by the Cape Churchill cameras last year. The auroras were pretty fantastic. Now this camera can point up, and it's well off the ground. It's going to be a really neat point of view.
Super cool.
So stay tuned for that.
Well, we're getting some questions about some polar bears rolling in here. So there's one question about, how do bears hunt on sea ice? Do they dive into the water? So there's a few different ways that bears hunt on sea ice. One of the best known and maybe one of the most common ways is called still hunting. And For seals, so the type of seals that polar bears are mainly going after are the ring seal, that's their main prey, but also bearded seal, and to a small extent around here, harbor seal. But let's talk about the ring seal. So ring seals, they kind of set up these home ranges out underneath the sea ice. And throughout the winter season, they're maintaining breathing holes. Because, of course, they're mammals, they need to breathe air. So they'll have a series of maybe 5 or 6 breathing holes that, of course, allow them to pop up and take a breath and then continue swimming underwater to find their fish. And polar bears have figured this out pretty well. And so if they're able to locate a seal breathing hole, they are very, very patient. And they will just sit very quietly, crouch down next to a seal hole for hours and hours on end. And as soon as a seal pops up, the polar bear is going to dive into that seal hole and using its massive teeth and claws, going to pull that seal up. And polar bears have really evolved. You can see the difference between brown bears and polar bears. Many of these adaptations are for this type, similar hunting of seals. So they've got, polar bears have a much kind of smoother, more sleek profile than grizzly bears. This is allowing them to get in and out of those seal holes. Their teeth, the back teeth, are much more for shearing and cutting meat and fat compared to the grizzly bear's back molars that are much more for grinding. And the polar bear claws are thick and sharply curved, and can also be used for attraction on sea ice, actually, whereas the brown bear claws are long, lightly curved, and more used for digging. Other types of polar bear hunting techniques, we think that, they can probably be sitting on the side of an ice floe or a lead. A lead is an area of open water within the sea ice, and be waiting for seals to come up and dive in. They can probably do some pretty stealthy hunting. There's videos online of a seal resting on sea ice. So seals will haul out to have a break from swimming. And if the polar bear is able to sneak up either from underwater and up or over the ice, that's maybe a good way to get a seal. Very rarely polar bears will be able to maybe get a seal more in open water, but this is going to be when the seal's pretty unaware, maybe sleeping, maybe still pretty close to ice, because if you have a race underwater between a seal and a polar bear, the seal's going to win every time. Polar bears are excellent swimmers, but they're much more, and they can actually dive as well, but seals are a lot more agile, a lot more easily able to dive and maneuver underwater more quickly than a polar bear. So polar bears really need that sea ice to do the majority of their hunting. So that's why sea ice is so important. And we had another question about what they're eating at this time of year. So we had talked about that a little bit, but I know we got cut off to some extent. So right now we do see polar bears eating kelp. We'll see them eat goose eggs or carcasses when they can, but it's really the calories from fat and that seal fat that they're waiting for. So while on land, polar bears are losing roughly 1 kilogram of fat a day. And many of them, that's okay. They come on to shore with a lot of fat resources, fat reserves that they're living off of. But it's the younger bears and the females that are trying to reproduce later on this year that will struggle with any sort of decrease in their hunting time. So for female polar bears, they are mating in the spring, but they have something that's called delayed implantation. And this is when they may have a fertilized egg after mating, but they're not technically pregnant because that fertilized egg is not implanting until around this time of year. And that's after her body's kind of assessing how much fat does she have and does she have enough to fulfill a pregnancy. And we know that the threshold for a pregnant female polar bear, it's going to be around 420 pounds or so. And if she's below that, her body just physically can't really do a pregnancy. And it's the same with every mammal, including humans. There's, once you're a low enough weight, you just can't produce a child. And so polar bears at this time of year, if they are pregnant, if they have enough fat, they're going to go into their dens and they're going to do a sort of hibernation until they give birth later this winter and then emerge with their cubs next spring. So pregnant females at this time, they haven't eaten since July, and they're not going to eat again until about February or March. So they can go quite a while without food. It's a really long time without food. I don't like going a few hours without food, and these bears are able to last quite a while. So it is pretty darn incredible. And we have some questions about, maybe we've got a question about cubs, so I'll answer that right now in that same vein. So polar bears have between 1 and 3 cubs a year. Triplets used to be more common in this area. Now we're seeing a lot more single and twin cubs. And the gestation, so the time between the actual pregnancy realizing itself and giving birth, it's only really a few months. Polar bear cubs are born very, very small. They're only maybe a pound at birth. And the mother to baby ratio of bears, actually in general, bears have the smallest babies compared to their own body size of any placental mammal, which is pretty cool. So for humans, one of our babies might be 1/15 the size of the mother. For bears, it's maybe 1/500th, or in one case with the panda, 1/1100th. That's crazy. So this is good for bears because it allows them to give birth fairly easily, but then those cubs grow really fast, drinking really fatty, rich milk from their mom. So it's pretty darn neat. Let's see what else. So is there any info on current ice conditions and weather, and are things above average or below for this year? So I'm not sure if we have too much information at the moment. Scientific.
Come in and talk about that, couldn't we?
Do you want Jen to join us, or?
We should ask Jen. Maybe
All right,
step out for a
let's do
second,
it.
And we'll just have Jen pop.
Well, what a treat, ladies and gentlemen. So we have with us this week, part of what PBI does during this time of year is our Tundra Connections programming through our own website. And with that, we bring up experts from all around the world and different areas, and we talk to all different groups. And so we have some broadcasts planned this week. And one of the experts with us this week is Dr. Jen Kay from the University of Colorado, and she is a climate specialist, sea ice expert, all that good stuff. And so maybe we will have Dr. Jen tell us a little bit about what's going on with the sea ice and the climate this year.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Elisa. Hello, everyone. So let's see. September this year was actually the 4th lowest Arctic sea ice extent on record. So I guess if you have a question about how sea ice compares to like the recent past or the long-term climatology, well, the recent past, 4th lowest. We've had a couple of years before this that have had less sea ice, 2012 being one of them. But compared to the long-term average, like when satellites started measuring sea ice, we have, maybe 60% of what we used to have. That's Pan-Arctic, though. And here in Hudson Bay, I'm not as familiar with the specifics of what's going on here. But I know we've had increasing open water just about everywhere in the Arctic. So.
And while we have you here, there's a question about, will the El Nino have any effect on the sea ice? Do you know anything about that?
That's a good question. So El Nino, for those of you who aren't familiar, is basically when the tropical Pacific gets really warm. And this has impacts on the tropical atmosphere and ocean, but it actually has worldwide impacts. So when we have El Nino, we tend to have, for example, high global mean temperatures. It's one of the reasons 2015 might come out as the warmest year on record. The impacts on the Arctic will rely on something we call teleconnections. So that's how you basically connect the weather and the ocean conditions in the tropical regions with those in the Arctic. And those kinds of linkages do exist, but there's a lot of variability in the climate system. So it's a question of how strong they are. So I think there are some connections, but I don't think I would make my weather forecast based on them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I can speak just a little bit to what happened during the breakup season this year. So every year in Hudson Bay, of course, there's the time when the ice freezes and a time when the ice breaks up and melts. And we know that the breakup season was a little bit interesting this year in this area. A wind event came through and it pushed a lot of the ice in the western Hudson Bay over to the east and south. And so overall in Hudson Bay, the ice concentration was roughly normal. But if you looked regionally, it was quite different. It was a lot heavier east and south and a lot lighter in the west. And so what we saw from some of our collared bears was that a lot of them chose to ride the ice down and continue hunting. And now a lot of them would have gotten off in the province of Ontario or maybe more southern Manitoba. And I'm sure a few of them made their way back up, but maybe not all of them did. It's quite the energy trade-off. Polar bears need to decide what's worth it. Of course, their body fat matters a lot to them, as we talked about. And so is it worth walking, or are they going to wait down there for the ice this year? So we'll have to wait and see what happens. So far, there are a few polar bears out here. And there's not a ton, but people have been seeing, I think one day a group saw 10 polar bears. There's been 8 polar bears. We've seen a couple today. It's a little bit windy today. And when it's a bit windy, they like to kind of hunker down. But it is getting colder, which is a great sign. And often when it's colder, we see more activity. And one of those activities we see is sparring. And we have a question about sparring. And it says, why do polar bears spar? Are they siblings? That's a great question. Maybe. They might be siblings. We think that a lot of times they're not necessarily siblings. It seems to be mostly the males, although there has been one case of people seeing a female spar up here, which in that one we were definitely wondering if she was sparring with her brother or something, because that's pretty rare. But usually it's a couple males, and we think it's largely kind of almost preparation for the mating season. They're kind of sizing each other up, figuring out their strengths, kind of having a good time too. Polar bears are pretty intelligent and they like having things to do, and maybe it's a bit fun. Maybe they're learning what it's going to take to really go up against another male. One thing we do see at this time of the year, though, is if one of them gets tired or a little bit scratched or something, they usually back out of it pretty quick. It's really not worth fighting all out at this time of year because there's just no reason. So we'll see them do it a little bit for fun and then kind of back down and go their own ways. However, in the spring, when they're actually fighting over females, things get pretty ugly. So they can inflict some pretty serious damage on each other trying to get the lady who's ready to mate. And yeah, so they get a little bit of practice in at this time of the year. And of course, it's pretty amazing to watch. It's pretty cool. So maybe we'll see some of that this year. If we do, we will be very sure to show everyone on the Explore cams because it's lots of fun. All right, let's see what else we have. Oh, there's a question about why are there fewer triplets these days. So we do believe that is linked to the sea ice. Even when there were triplets kind of, 30, 20 years ago, there's usually very clearly a runt out of the triplets. There's one that's a lot smaller and it would be harder for that bear just to make it past, up higher to the ages. And there's competition among cubs to get their mother's milk. And we would see the runts kind of be pretty scratched up and all that. So not to say some of them couldn't make it to adulthood. I'm sure some did. But these days, I just think it's harder for females to produce 3 cubs and raise them all, so it's almost like a waste of resources to have 3 cubs. There's just not enough of the nutrition out here to really support that anymore, and that's why we think we're seeing a lot fewer triplets in this area. Absolutely. So another question: are the numbers of polar bears that are seen still good and not diminishing? Are they looking fed and happy? Yeah, so that's a great question. I think one thing to keep in mind, we're talking to you this year from Churchill, and we are in the middle of the western Hudson Bay polar bear population. But there are 18 other polar bear populations around the world in 5 different countries. And so a lot of these polar bears have kind of different situations. They're going to be experiencing changes in the climate at different rates in different ways. They might have slightly different prey sources or pressures on them. And so in this area, we do know that sea ice is changing. This is the best studied polar bear population in the world. Canada has 2/3 of the world's polar bear population, which is pretty cool. The United States has 2 populations and Canada has about 13. So that's pretty neat. And we have linked some changes in this population to climate change. So there was a period in about the late 90s, early 2000s where this population declined about 22%. Since then, we believe it has stabilized, as we would expect to see kind of dips and stabilizations as these bears adjust to shifts in their climate. And so right now, we think the population's right around between 900 to 1,000 bears. It's hard to know for sure. The ones we've seen this year, it's quite a mix. I've seen a couple pretty thin bears, but also quite a few that are looking fed and healthy. And so we'll just see what happens. There's what's happening here. It takes time, and we've got lots of time to make sure that these polar bears stay healthy and happy, and that there's sea ice in Hudson Bay. And that's one of PBI's goals, is to keep polar bears in the Arctic always. And we do that by everyone's help, your help and the help of our partners, and just inspiring people to care about these beautiful animals, but also all the other Arctic animals that you guys are watching through the Explore cams and through other avenues. There's some pretty amazing wildlife out there. Some other wildlife we see out here often, at least often this year, there's quite a few snowy owls around here right now, which is pretty darn neat. So we're going to see if we can get some of those on cam at some point this season. There's been 1 or 2 Arctic foxes roaming around. It's actually kind of a low year for the foxes, but they're out here, so we'll keep an eye out for them, for you, and occasionally a red fox too, so we'll also look out for them. which is, lots of cool stuff going on. It's never boring out here. Maybe I'll talk a bit about the environment. So we are on the tundra, and the tundra is an area that's characterized by a short growing season and cold temperatures. So you will see some trees dotting the landscape out here. They're few and far between. And if you do see one, it'll look pretty small, but it could be over 100 years old. They grow very, very slowly out here, but it's pretty cool. A lot of the bushes you'll see are willows. There are just a ridiculous amount of willow species out here. It's pretty cool, and polar bears really like kind of laying in the willows. We get ptarmigan in the willows. Those are like the little Arctic chicken. They're pretty darn cute, so we'll look out for them. But this area, on first glance, it can look kind of bleak or lifeless, but there's just so much going on out here. Okay.
And Lisa, I might add too that this is definitely the fall, and had you been up here about 3 weeks earlier, all the little willow bushes and things, their leaves change color before they drop, and so it's it's much like the fall in the Midwest or the western eastern part of North America, in that everything, the whole tundra just looks to be on fire with all the different colors. The time, though, is pretty short. You got to catch it just a few days long, and then the wind picks up and all the leaves are gone. But at that time, it is just spectacular here. So I think it just kind of highlights, you really got to look close for the beauty here. I mean, there isn't big mountains and things like that some of us enjoy, or things like that, but it is a really spectacular place if you really get down and look at some of the interesting things that are here.
Yeah, we sure like it. So I want to answer a question first about Aurora, maybe. So Explore.org had, we were following a collared bear this year named Aurora and her 2 cubs. And Aurora actually slipped her collar off, we think, out on the sea ice about mid-year. We have not yet spotted her, but if we ever do again, we are going to be sure to let people know. She could very well be around here. We just haven't seen her this year. Scientists haven't. So we're sure she's doing fine. And hopefully this year we'll have another bear for you guys to follow. And maybe this one will keep its collar on a little bit longer. But it's totally up to the bear. So we'll just have to wait and see. One thing... Yeah, so we don't ever collar adult males. Adult males have very thick necks compared to their heads, and they can just kind of pop the collar off their, I think I've heard their heads and necks referred to as like a pylon shape. It's just thick to thin. Females, their necks are a little bit thinner compared to their skulls, so we can put a collar on them a little easier, but they can still slip them off if they want to most of the time, or especially if they have cubs. Sometimes the cubs aren't really sure what's on mom and want it off, so they'll pull that right off. But it's really a pretty incredible way to get data on polar bears and understand what type of habitat matters to them, so that we can then hopefully conserve that habitat, plan for, if there's ever an oil spill in the Arctic. That collar data really helps inform us of where polar bears are, when and why. And so we can do things like mitigation, we can make plans, action plans, things like that. And just a host of other, our collar data is used for a lot of questions and answers, and it's pretty important. So,
can you tell us a little bit about the collar mechanisms itself and how they're able to just let them drop off too after a certain amount of time?
Yeah, so there are built-in collar mechanisms that, are programmed to fall off at certain times, so that the bear can just get rid of it if it hasn't pulled it off its head yet. And most of the time they work pretty darn well. And there's also some other mechanisms you can build in where if you're close to a polar bear, you have a remote control thing and hit a button and have it fall off. So we try to make sure that collars aren't on bears for too long, and they give us a lot of great data while they are on bears, so they've been pretty important. So let's see what other questions we have. Actually, maybe while I'm looking up more questions, maybe you could talk a little bit about the trail system here and maybe buggies. People are going to be seeing buggies roaming around, and what are they doing, and are they allowed to go anywhere, or what are the buggy rules?
Totally. So there's a handful of buggies out here. In order to operate a buggy, the company has to have a permit. So there's only about 18 buggies out here, something in that neighborhood, less than 20 buggies. They're roaming around here on the shore of Hudson Bay. The 2 main companies, they've got an agreement where everybody stays on an existing trail network that we're told was created by the military when they were here. This is going back to those rocket range days and even earlier when the U.S. military was here at Fort Churchill. So we stay on the trail largely because the tundra takes a long time to repair itself. If we were to take one of these big heavy vehicles and just roam around wherever we please, we would scar the tundra, and it would stay that way. And we just want to make sure we can preserve this place, take people out to see this place and help share that with you with the Explore cams, but also make sure we preserve the views that we have for people that will be here in the future. So we'll stay on the trails. You'll see once the lakes start to freeze up, then the buggies will start scooting across the lakes. That is fair game, although we'll have to wait just a little bit longer. We want to make sure we don't have to go swimming to try to retrieve a buggy if it goes through the ice. So that has happened in the past. But yeah, so